Chapter 10 of Operation Terror by Murray Leinster. Read by Mark Nelson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Operation Terror, Chapter 10. There was a 3-day-old moon in the sky when the last colors faded in the west. When darkness fell, it was already low. It gave little light, not much more than the stars alone. It did help Lockley while it lasted, however. He knew the terrain about Boulder Lake, but not in detail. And it would not be wise for him to move openly to wreak destruction on the enemies of his nation. He used the moonlight for his approach by the least practical route to the lake. When it dimmed and went behind the mountains, he continued to climb, sliding dangerously, then descend and climb again as the rough going demanded. His mind was absorbed with reflections upon what he meant to do. The wrecks on the highway would have given notice to the invaders that he could do damage. They would take every possible precaution against him. It was typical of Lockley that he painstakingly imagined every obstacle that might be put in his way. During the last half-hour of his scrambling travel, for example, he was tormented by a measure his enemies might have used to make him advertise his presence. If they simply laid rifle cartridges on the ground at intervals of 25 or 50 yards, he could not cross that line with his device in operation without blowing up those shells. It was a possible countermeasure that caused him to sweat with worry. But it wasn't thought of by anyone else. To contrive it, a man would have to know how the detonation field worked and how far it extended. Nobody but Lockley knew. Therefore, no one could contrive this defense against him. He worked his way to Boulder Lake's back door through brushwood and over boulders. Presently, he looked down upon his destination. To his right and left, rocky masses were silhouetted against the starry sky. He gazed down on the lake and the shoreline where the hotel would be built, and the places where roads came out of the wilderness. There were changes since the time he looked down from Vale's survey post and before the terror beam captured him. He catalogued them mentally, but the sight before him was intolerable. Everything he saw, here where the space monsters were believed to hold sway, was in reality the work of men. Rage filled him at the sight, hatred, fury. In the rest of the world, an entirely different sort of emotion was felt about the subject of the invaders. The United States had announced to all the world that American and other scientists, working together, had solved the mystery of the alien weapon. They had produced a duplicate of the terror beam. It was no less effective and no less an absolute weapon than the invaders. And a defense had been found which was complete. It was being rushed into production. The experimental counter-beam generators would be moved into position to frustrate and defeat the monsters who had landed upon Earth. Military detachments, protected by the counter-generators, would move upon Boulder Lake at dawn. By sunset tomorrow, the aliens would be dead or captive, and their ship would undoubtedly be in the hands of scientists for study. Moreover, the United States would provide counter-weapons for other nations. In no more than months, every continent and nation on Earth would be equipped to defy any alien landing that might take place. The world would be able to defend itself. It would be equipped to do so. And this was the resolve of the United States, because the world could not exist half free and half enslaved by creatures from a distant planet. The news poured out from all sources. The alien weapon was understood and now could be defied. Soon all the world would be provided with counter-weapons. It was necessary for all the world to be prepared, and prepared it would be. This was the information which made all the world rejoice, though not yet at ease, because aliens still occupied a tiny part of the Earth. But all the world was eager for confirmation of the news it had just received. Lockley had no such soothing anticipations. He shook with fury because what he saw before him was so appalling as to be almost unbelievable. It was not dark in the place he looked down upon. There were bright floodlights placed here and there to drench a large area with light. There were a few figures in sight, but what the floodlights showed made Lockley quiver with hatred. The floodlights were of typically human type. There were vehicles parked on a level, grassy space. They were of human manufacture. There was no spaceship in the lake, but there was a 3-stage rocket set up, ready for firing. It was of the kind used by humans to put artificial satellites into orbit. Lockley even knew its designation, and that it used the new solid fuels for propulsion. In the lair of the creatures from outer space, there was nothing from outer space. There was nothing in view which was alien or unearthly or extraterrestrial, and Lockley made inarticulate growling sounds because he saw with absolute clarity and certainty that there never had been anything from outer space at this spot. There were no monsters. There never had been, and the truth was more horribly enraging than the deception had been. Because this could mean the death of the world. This was an attempt to fight the last war on Earth in disguise. Humans had posed as non-human beings so that America would fight against phantoms while its great military rival pretended to help and actually stabbed them from behind. It was completely logical, of course. An admitted attack by terror beams in the form of death rays would involve retaliation by America. Against a human enemy, great, roaring missiles could circle Earth to plunge down upon that enemy's cities, to turn them and their inhabitants into incandescent gas. An attack known to be by humans and upon humans must touch off the world's last war in which every living thing might die. No conceivable success at the beginning could prevent full retaliation. But if the attack were believed to be from space, then American weapons and valor would be spent against creatures which were no more than ghosts. Lockley moved forward. Only he could know the situation as it presented itself here. Even vengeance for Jill should be put aside, if it called for action irrelevant to this state of things. But it did not. A full and terrible revenge for her required exactly the action the coolest of cold-blooded resolutions would suggest be taken now, and Lockley moved on and downward to take it. He began to crawl downhill toward the lights, unaware that there were some gaps in his picture of the total scene. For example, these lights could be detected by aircraft overhead. The fact did not occur to Lockley. He was not given pause by the relaxation of the enemy's disguise so far as air observation was concerned. He didn't think of it. He moved on. He drew near the lighted area, but he did not walk, he crawled. He began to listen with fury-sharpened ears. If he could get close to that huge rocket, close enough to detonate its solid fuel stores, that would be at once revenge and expedience. If the rocket's fuel blew up instead of burning as intended, it would annihilate the camp. It would wipe out every living creature present. But there would be fragments left by the explosion. There would be corpses. There would be wreckage. And that wreckage and those corpses would be unmistakably human. The last war on Earth might not be avoided, but at the worst it would be fought against America's actual enemy and not against imaginary monsters. It was worth dying to accomplish even that. But Jill. Lockley's progress was infinitely slow, but he needed to take the greatest pains. He listened carefully. He heard the faint, high roaring of the planes overhead. They were far away. There were sounds of insects and the cries of night birds and the rustling of leaves and foliage. There was another sound, a new sound. It was inexplicable. It was a strange and intermittent muttering. There was a certain irregular rhythm to it, a familiar rhythm. He crawled on. There was movement suddenly off to his left. Then